The invitation had been a mistake. Ethan Cole knew it the moment he stepped through the revolving glass doors of the Whitmore Grand and felt the heat of 300 chandelier bulbs land on his borrowed blazer. The jacket belonged to his neighbor, Dennis, a retired schoolteacher who had bought it for his daughter's wedding 11 years ago and never worn it since. It fit well enough across the shoulders, but pulled slightly at the chest, and the left lapel had a faint crease that no amount of pressing with a damp cloth had quite erased. He stood in the marble lobby and took stock of the room. The charity gala for the Children's Hospital Foundation of New York had drawn the kind of crowd Ethan usually watched from the outside through shop windows, from across intersections, from the cab of his van as he waited at a red light on Fifth Avenue with a truckload of replacement boiler parts. These were people whose coats cost more than his monthly rent. The women moved in organized constellations of silk and jewelry. The men spoke in the low, unhurried voices of people who had never once wondered whether their card would go through. Ethan had ended up here because of a failed heat exchanger and a stroke of unlikely luck. 2 weeks earlier, he'd answered a service call at the Whitmore during a cold snap that sent temperatures plunging to single digits. The building's primary heating system had failed at 4 a.m, and by 6 a.m., Ethan had the problem isolated and fixed a cracked secondary manifold and a sensor that had been misread for months, silently accumulating the conditions for a total shutdown. The hotel's facilities director, a soft-spoken man named Gerald Webb, had shaken Ethan's hand with both of his own and said, with evident sincerity, that Ethan had saved the weekend. The envelope had arrived 3 days later, a formal invitation with the hotel's crest embossed in gold. A handwritten note from Gerald. "For you and a guest, if you'd like. You earned it." Ethan hadn't brought a guest. There wasn't anyone to bring. His daughter Sophie was 8 years old, and 8-year-olds didn't attend black-tie fundraisers. His sister Claudia had offered to watch her, had practically pushed him out the door, saying, "Go, be a person for one night." You remember what that's like, right? He remembered. Mostly. He moved carefully through the crowd toward the outer edge of the room where the pressure was lower. Someone pressed a glass of champagne into his hand, a reflex of hospitality. A server too practiced to ask, and he took it without drinking, using it instead as a prop, something to hold while he watched the room. A jazz quartet played from a low stage near the windows. The snow outside had thickened since he'd parked 2 blocks away, and now it fell in heavy, unhurried sheets past the tall glass, muting the city's orange glow to something soft and gray. Sophie had made him promise to bring home a piece of cake if there was cake. There better be cake, he thought, scanning the dessert table along the far wall. That was when he first saw Victoria Hale. He didn't know her name yet. He knew only the way she stood slightly apart from the nearest cluster of guests, a glass of water in her hand, not champagne, and her posture so precisely controlled that it read at a distance as composure. But up close, he would later understand, was closer to exhaustion. She was dressed in something dark and structured that cost more than his van, and her hair was pulled back with the kind of deliberate neatness that spoke of effort rather than ease. She looked like someone who had decided, long ago, that the way to survive a room like this was to become its most seamless piece of furniture. But her eyes told a different story. They moved across the room without landing anywhere, not bored searching. Or perhaps not searching so much as accustomed to looking and finding nothing worth stopping for. Ethan looked away. He had his own reasons for being here, and they had nothing to do with the woman by the window. He found the cake. Chocolate layer, 3 tiers, with a sugar snowflake on top that he thought Sophie would appreciate. He asked a server quietly whether he might be able to take a small piece home for his daughter, and the server, a young woman with kind eyes, said she'd see what she could do. He thought about Sophie at home right now, probably convincing Aunt Claudia to let her stay up past 9. She'd be in her dinosaur pajamas, the faded ones she refused to give up even though the ankylosaur on the chest had almost entirely worn away, and she'd be negotiating hard for one more chapter of whatever they were, reading. Sophie was an exceptional negotiator. She got that from her mother, though Ethan hadn't said that out loud in years. He thought, I should go home. He thought, one more hour. For Claudia's sake. She'll ask if I talk to anyone. He drifted toward the balcony doors. The balcony was narrow and cold and entirely empty. The snow came down at an angle out here, driven by a wind off the Hudson, and it gathered in thin lines along the iron railing and on the shoulders of his blazer within seconds. It was objectively miserable. Ethan leaned against the rail and breathed in the cold and felt, for the first time all evening, like himself. He'd been out there perhaps 4 minutes when the door opened behind him. She stepped out without looking at him, which told him she hadn't expected company. She stopped when she registered his presence, a half-second pause, a recalibration, and then continued to the other end of the railing, which was maybe 6 feet away. She set her water glass on the rail. She looked out at the snow. You're not wearing a coat, she said. It wasn't quite an observation, and wasn't quite a concern. Something in between. Neither are you, Ethan said. A silence. Not uncomfortable, but testing like two people listening to the same frequency to see if they could agree it was there. I needed air, she said. Same. Another silence. The snow fell. Somewhere below, a cab horn sounded twice and then went quiet. You're not a donor, she said. Not accusatory. Curious. Fixed your boiler, he said. 2 weeks ago. Gerald Webb sent me an invitation. Something shifted in her expression, not warmth exactly, but a relaxing. Like a sentence that had been braced for an unwanted object clause and found instead a simple period. That's Gerald, she said. He's been trying to get tradespeople included in this event for 3 years. The board keeps delaying it. She picked up her water glass. I think he finally just did it himself. Good for Gerald. Yes. A pause. Good for Gerald. He looked at her. She was staring at the snow with the expression of someone recalling something they hadn't thought about in a long time. Not sad, something more neutral and harder to name. The expression of a person taking honest inventory. You okay? He asked. She seemed surprised by the question. Genuinely, openly surprised, as though no one in that room, and perhaps in that entire year, had asked her a version of it without something attached, without an agenda nested inside the concern. I don't know, she said, which he could tell was a more honest answer than she usually gave. Fair enough. They stood in the snow a while longer. She told him her name, Victoria Hale, and he told her his. She didn't react to her own name the way powerful people sometimes did, watching for recognition. She just said it and moved on. I run a company, she added, as if to complete some necessary disclosure. I run a van, he said. She almost smiled. Almost. Do you like it? She asked. The van? The work. What you do? He thought about it honestly. Yeah, he said. I like fixing things that are broken. I like that there's a real answer. Either it works or it doesn't. Not a lot of he gestured vaguely at the lit windows behind them. Ambiguity. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I would give almost anything for less ambiguity. The wind shifted. Snow came off the railing and dissolved against his sleeve. Then she said something that he would think about for days afterward. Said it quietly, without drama, the way a person says something they have only recently understood to be true. I've never been kissed. He heard it clearly. And his first instinct was that he'd misheard some combination of wind and noise and the strangeness of the evening, scrambling the sentence into something it wasn't. He almost laughed, not from cruelty but from the pure reflex of disbelief. Then he looked at her. Her jaw was set. Her eyes hadn't moved from the snow. She wasn't embarrassed, or rather, she was past embarrassment, had arrived at some harder, cleaner place on the other side of it. She had said it the way someone states a fact they have grown tired of carrying alone. She's not joking. He didn't laugh. He started. I know what it sounds like, she said. I was going to say that's something I wasn't expecting to hear tonight. She finally looked at him. Something in her eyes guarded, measuring, searching for mockery. Finding none. "I've been busy," she said, and the simplicity of it, the smallness of that word against the weight of what she'd just said, landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there. "Okay," he said. "Just that, okay." And somehow, that was exactly right. She called the number on the business card he'd given her, the one with the little flame logo that Sophie had designed in crayon and that Ethan had, without entirely meaning to, used as the template for his actual cards 4 days after the gala. He was under a building on West 86th when his phone buzzed. He read the message with greasy hands and a flashlight clenched in his teeth. "This is Victoria Hale. I would like to get coffee. Is that something you do?" "V," he typed back. "I do coffee. Thursday morning works." She replied within 30 seconds. Thursday, 8 a.m. He named a place, a bakery called Morrow's on Amsterdam Avenue, that had been there since 1987 and smelled permanently of cardamom and brown butter. It had 12 seats and no Wi-Fi sign-up, and the owner, a woman named Patrice, still wrote orders on a paper pad. He'd been going there since before Sophie was born. Victoria arrived on Thursday at 7:58, which told him two things. She was punctual to the point of discipline, and she'd given herself time to look at the place from outside before going in. He watched her come through the door. She was dressed differently than she'd been at the gala, less armor, more something approaching civilian. Dark wool coat, hair down, she looked younger. She also looked like someone who was trying very hard to look like she wasn't trying, which was its own form of effort. She looked at the menu board, a blackboard with chalk lettering, the day's specials in a different color, and visibly hesitated. "What's good?" she asked. "What do you usually drink?" "Whatever my assistant puts on my desk." He looked at her. "I know that it's hot and it works. Okay, get the cortado, and one of those." He pointed at the pastry case, a square of cardamom morning cake with turbinado sugar on top. "I don't usually eat in the morning. You'll eat that one." She did. She ate half of it in the first 5 minutes and then looked mildly betrayed, as though something had gotten past her defenses that she hadn't consented to let through. They sat at the corner table by the window. Snow had been cleared from the sidewalk outside, but piled at the curb in gray-white ridges, and the city moved past in its winter compression, people in heavy coats, breath visible, walking with purpose. He asked her about herself without asking about the company. He asked where she grew up. "Connecticut, a town with a name that sounded like a law firm," she said, and he laughed. He asked what she'd wanted to be before she was what she was. She was quiet a long time on that one. "A marine biologist," she finally said. "Seriously?" "I was 8. I'd seen a documentary about coral reefs." A pause. Things moved differently after that. "What moved them?" "My father." Said without bitterness, but without softness either. Just information. "He started the company. I was always the one who was supposed to take it. I took it." A small, contained shrug. "I'm good at it. Are you happy at it?" She looked at him the way she had on the balcony, that searching, recalibrating look, like she was checking whether the question came with something hidden. "I don't think I know the difference anymore," she said, "between happy and good at." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "My daughter asks me that sometimes. Are you happy, Daddy? Like it's the most obvious thing to measure." She sounds perceptive, terrifyingly so. He smiled. "Her name's Sophie. She's 8. She negotiates like a union lawyer, and she still sleeps with a stuffed elephant named Gerald." Victoria looked at him. "She named her elephant Gerald after Gerald Ford. She's been on a president's kick since kindergarten." A beat. And then Victoria Hale, CEO, did something he suspected she didn't do very often. She laughed. A real one, not managed, not polished. Just air and surprise and something released. "There you are," he thought, and didn't say. The invitation to his apartment happened because of a broken pipe and a cancelled plan. Victoria had suggested, with what he'd come to recognize as her characteristic obliqueness around anything that mattered to her, that they might do something again sometime. He'd translated this as, She wants to see me again, but won't say so directly, and had texted her on a Tuesday to say that he was making dinner and she was welcome to come, no pressure, Sophie would be there. She'd arrived carrying a very expensive bottle of wine and a coloring book about ocean animals. Sophie had opened the door. She was in her after-school outfit leggings, a sweatshirt that said Natural History Museum across the chest, hair in 2 uneven pigtails that Ethan had done himself and was genuinely proud of. She looked at Victoria with the frank, unfiltered assessment only available to children and animals. "You're tall," Sophie said. "You're right," Victoria said. "Do you know about dolphins?" "I know a little." "I know a lot," Sophie said, and stepped back to let her in. Ethan watched from the kitchen doorway, a dish towel over his shoulder, and thought. The apartment was what it was, a 2-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building that had good bones and needed paint. Bookshelves along every wall, a collection of mismatched furniture, Sophie's drawings taped at varying heights. She insisted on hanging them herself, which meant the gallery ranged from knee-height to above the doorframe. A smell of garlic and something tomato-based. The radiator in the corner, doing its particular job, ticking and sighing. Victoria stood in the middle of it with the wine and the coloring book and looked, for a moment, like someone who had been set down in a country where the currency was unfamiliar and the language was slightly different from the one she knew, but where she suspected, with a feeling she hadn't had in years, that the food would be very good. He made pasta. Real pasta, the kind where you make the sauce low and slow and it fills the apartment for an hour before you eat. Sophie talked for 45 of those 60 minutes, covering dolphins, Gerald Ford, the injustice of fractions, the geologic timeline, and the compelling case for getting a dog. Victoria listened to all of it with an attention that Ethan recognized as genuine, not performed politeness, but actual interest. The way someone listens when they don't know the rules yet and so they pay close attention to everything. After dinner, Sophie produced the coloring book Marine Life of the Atlantic. Ethan read upside down and commandeered Victoria to the coffee table. "You do the octopus," Sophie directed. "I'm doing the whale shark. We're not allowed to use the same colors unless we ask." "Understood," Victoria said. Ethan washed dishes and listened to them negotiate over the teal crayon. Later, after Sophie had been read to and talked to sleep, he found Victoria standing at the bookshelf with a mug of tea he'd made her without asking, reading the spines. She'd taken off her shoes without thinking about it, which meant she'd relaxed past the point of performance, and she was standing in her socks, dark, very clean socks, on the slightly uneven floor. "You have a lot of books about weather," she said. "Sophie's going through a meteorology phase. Before the presidents, after dinosaurs, before presidents." She turned from the shelf. The lamp behind her was warm yellow, and the snow outside was back, hitting the window softly. She looked, he thought, nothing like the woman he'd seen at the gala. Polished, yes, some things didn't leave, but open in a way she hadn't been there. Like a door that had been unlocked from inside. "Thank you," she said. "For this. For letting me." She stopped, tried again. "I don't do this. Come places. Just be somewhere. I don't know how to be somewhere without a reason." "You had a reason," he said. "That's a very small reason. Those are the best kind." She looked at him, and he looked back, and something passed between them that was not yet the thing it was becoming, but was unmistakably pointed in that direction. "Sophie's good," she said. "You're good with her. She's easy to be good with." "I don't think that's entirely true. I think you work at it. Every day," he said honestly. She nodded, as if he'd confirmed something she already suspected. She finished her tea. She put on her shoes. She said goodnight to him at the door with the careful courtesy of someone who wanted to say more and had not yet decided how. He watched the elevator door close and stood in the hallway a moment, listening to the building settle, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. The specific, frightening hope of wanting something real. She invited him to her building on a Thursday night in mid-February, and he went. He'd expected the penthouse. He hadn't expected the feeling. The elevator required a code and a keycard. The lobby had no lobby in the way that normal lobbies existed. It was just a private entrance with a concierge who nodded at Victoria with precise, professional neutrality. The apartment on the 42nd floor was floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, and the view of Manhattan at night was the kind of thing people used as screensavers, vast and lit and absolutely indifferent. It was also, despite its size and its view and its careful design, extremely quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The other kind. He walked through it while she took a call. She apologized for 5 minutes. "I'm sorry, this won't." And then it was 15 minutes, and then 20, and he moved slowly through the open plan space, taking it in. The kitchen was the size of his whole living room, and equipped with appliances he recognized from professional installations. The shelves held books he could see she'd read, some flagged, some annotated alongside objects that had been placed with the distance of decoration rather than attachment. A single photograph on the far wall. A coastline, gray water, overcast sky. No people. She came back from the call looking taut around the edges, the way she looked when the armor was up. "Sorry," she said. "It's fine. I'll make dinner. Or I can order something. I'll cook," he said. She looked at him. "You don't have to. I know. Do you have pasta?" She genuinely didn't know if she had pasta. They searched the kitchen together and found, in a high cabinet, a box of spaghetti that had been there long enough to suggest it had been purchased for an intention that never materialized. He found olive oil, garlic, and a can of whole tomatoes. He found Parmesan in the back of the refrigerator. Still good. He found a lemon. "This is enough," he said. She sat at the kitchen island and watched him cook, and the sound of things happening in her kitchen, the oil going into the pan, the garlic softening, the tomatoes breaking down, slowly changed the quality of the air. It was a small change. But it was real. "I don't cook," she said. "I know. I literally don't. I've lived here 2 years and I've used that pan 3 times. For what? Reheating soup from a container." He looked up at her. "That's the saddest thing I've heard all week." Something in her expression shifted a flicker. Half apology, half recognition. She started. There was always something else to do. Always something that felt more important. More important than eating dinner? More urgent, she corrected. "Not the same thing, I know." He stirred the sauce. The window behind her showed the city, and the reflection in the glass showed the kitchen, and somewhere in the overlap between those 2 images, he could see what this space had been missing for however long she'd been in it. Company, he thought. Not the kind you schedule. The other kind. They ate at the island because the dining table, which could seat 10, was covered with documents and a laptop and a printed deck that had been annotated in red. They ate standing and then, halfway through, sitting, and she finished every bite and looked mildly surprised by this. "It's the same thing I made you at my place," he said. "It tastes different here. It's the same recipe," she considered. "Maybe it's the company," she said quietly, and then looked like she hadn't meant to say it quite that plainly. He let it stand. After dinner, she showed him the photograph, the coastline, the gray water. She'd taken it herself, she said. Maine, 6 years ago. She'd gone alone for a long weekend, told no one, turned her phone off for 48 hours. It was the last time she'd done something purely because she wanted to. "Why that weekend?" he asked. "My father had just stepped down. I'd just been announced as CEO. Everyone wanted something from me. She looked at the photograph. I just needed to see something that wasn't waiting for anything from me." He stood beside her and looked at the photograph. "Come to Sophie's school thing on Friday," he said. "It's the science fair. She's presenting on cloud formation." She looked at him. Nothing is waiting for anything from you there," he said. "You just have to look. A beat. Then, okay." Central Park was dense with people in the way it got on the first clear Saturday after a heavy snowfall. Families with sleds, dogs testing the new snow, children who had to be recovered from every snowbank they threw themselves into with visible joy and no regret. Sophie threw herself into the first available snowbank within 40 seconds of their arrival and came up with her hat sideways and an expression of complete satisfaction. Victoria, beside Ethan, watched this and said nothing, but he saw something move behind her eyes. They'd walked from the 72nd Street entrance, Sophie running ahead and doubling back in the pattern she always ran in parks, a kind of improvised figure 8 that kept her in sight while satisfying some internal need for range. Victoria had her hands in her coat pockets. She was dressed better than the occasion required, in the way that she still, sometimes, dressed for a world that wasn't quite the one she was in. But she was relaxed. More relaxed than she'd been at dinner. More relaxed, he thought, than he'd ever seen her. Sophie found the skating area by instinct, the long, flat stretch of cleared ice near the terrace, and turned to them with the expression of someone who has located precisely what they wanted without knowing they were looking for it. "Can we skate?" "Daddy, can we skate?" They rented skates from the stand. Sophie's were white. Ethan's were scuffed brown. Victoria's were the last available pair in her size, slightly too small, and she put them on with the careful, unconvinced expression of someone performing an act of faith. She was not, as it turned out, a natural skater. She stood at the ice's edge, holding the rail with both hands, while Sophie demonstrated increasing velocity 10 feet away, and Ethan skated slowly up beside her. "I haven't done this since I was a child," she said. "It comes back. I wasn't good at it then either. Hold on to my arm." She did, carefully, with the particular care of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. He adjusted his pace to hers, and they went slowly at first, then a little faster, and once she found the balance, it became something that was almost effortless. Two people moving at the same speed in the same direction, while the ice hissed under them, and Sophie executed a wobbly spin nearby, and the bare trees went past, and the city existed somewhere beyond the trees, far enough away to not matter. Sophie called out at some point, "You're doing it, Victoria!" Victoria looked at her, and then, almost against her own intention, smiled wide and unguarded and so different from her careful professional expressions that Ethan felt the contrast the way you feel a change in temperature. They skated until Sophie's ankles gave out, which was longer than he'd expected. Then they sat on a bench, and Sophie consumed a hot chocolate from the cart by the path, both hands wrapped around the cup, telling Victoria about cloud formation in the same thorough, unhurried way she'd presented it at the school science fair the day before. Victoria listened with total attention. She'd been that way at the science fair too, watching Sophie at the poster board, asking questions that were genuine, not performed, leaning slightly forward the way people do when they're actually interested and not managing an interaction. At some point, Sophie fell asleep. She sometimes did this. A sudden, total collapse into unconsciousness mid-afternoon after a morning of maximum exertion, with her head against Ethan's arm and the empty hot chocolate cup in her lap. The park was quieter now. The light had shifted to the particular low gold of late winter afternoon. He and Victoria sat side by side on the bench, with Sophie asleep between them, and the snow on the ground turning blue in the long shadows. "She asked me something yesterday," Victoria said, quietly, "the way you speak around sleeping children. Sophie, at the science fair, after her presentation, she asked me if I had a daughter." He waited. "I said no." She said, "That's okay. You can share mine for now." Victoria stopped, looked at the trees. She said it so straightforwardly, like it was obvious, like she'd thought it through and reached a reasonable conclusion. "She's 8, he said. "They haven't learned yet to make things more complicated than they are." "I know." A pause. "I've spent 20 years making things more complicated than they are." The light was gold. The snow was blue. Sophie breathed slowly against his arm. He said, "Hey." She turned to look at him. "Is this what normal feels like?" she asked. He looked at her, at the quality of her attention, the openness in her face, the specific stillness of a person who has stopped running long enough to feel where they've landed. "Yeah," he said. "I think this is pretty close." He kissed her, slowly, carefully, without urgency or performance or anything beyond the fact of two people reaching the place they had been moving toward for weeks. She went still for a half-second, surprised, maybe, receiving something she'd almost stopped expecting, and then she didn't pull back. She kissed him back, with a gentleness that was entirely her own. It wasn't the dramatic kind. It was the warm kind. The real kind. When he pulled back, she was looking at him with an expression he didn't have a word for. Not quite wonder, not quite relief, but something in the space between them. Something that had been locked and was now, slowly, opening. "Okay," she said, "just that." And somehow, that was exactly right. It was 2 weeks before he noticed the pattern. 3 before he named it. It began small, a canceled dinner, a rescheduled Saturday, a text that said, "Sorry, something came up," with no follow-up. He understood these things. He had a child and a business, and he understood the vocabulary of conflicting obligations. He rescheduled without complaint and didn't read into it. But then the dinners became alternate weeks and then more irregular than that, and the phone calls grew shorter and carried a quality of distraction he could hear even before she said anything. The background hum of her office, of a world that claimed her continuously and completely, and that had no interest in ceding ground. Sophie noticed before he acknowledged it. She asked on a Tuesday night, setting the table for two with the particular expressiveness of children doing something ordinary that isn't quite ordinary. "Is Victoria coming this week?" "Not this week, bug." "Next week?" He paused. "I'm not sure." Sophie put a fork down with the careful restraint of someone exercising considerable control over an emotion they've been told isn't for the dinner table. "She keeps not coming," she said. "She's busy, Soph. Everybody's busy." Eyeing him. "You're busy. You still come home." He wanted to say something that was both honest and fair to Victoria, and found that the two requirements were harder to reconcile than usual. He settled for, "It's more complicated than that," which satisfied neither of them. The next day he called Victoria at a time when he knew or had learned that she had a gap between meetings. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd seen his name and chosen to pick up, which he recognized as something rather than nothing. "Hey," he said. "Hey." The voice quality he'd noticed. The hum behind it. "You have 5 minutes? I have 3. Board prep is at 4. He didn't rush to the point. Rushing was for people who weren't sure they'd get to finish. "I just wanted to check in. It's been a while. I know. I'm sorry. This quarter has been." "I know this quarter," he said. "I'm not asking about this quarter." A short silence. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "Yeah, you do." The silence this time was longer. Not defensive, more like a person standing at the edge of a familiar threshold and recognizing the choice. "I'm not trying to disappear," she said. "I'm genuinely not. I know you're not trying to." He kept his voice even. "I'm asking whether it's happening anyway." Another silence. Through the phone he heard something not quite a sigh, not quite a breath, the sound a person makes when they've been held in a position too long and have just been offered permission to shift. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I keep a pause. Every time things are good I find reasons to be somewhere else. I've been doing it my whole life and I know I'm doing it and I can't always make myself stop." "Okay," he said. She stopped. "That's not a good enough answer. It's an honest one." "Ethan, I'm not asking you to fix it tonight," he said. "I'm just asking you to know that I see it. That's all." She was quiet. Then, Okay, he said. He hung up and sat a moment at his kitchen table with the phone face down and the sound of Sophie's TV in the other room, and thought about the careful, difficult work of being present to someone who was still learning that it was safe to be somewhere. The next 3 weeks were better. Then they weren't. The particular night it came apart was a Thursday in March. He'd made a reservation, a real one, not the bakery, a restaurant Sophie's teacher had recommended with candles on the tables and a bread course and everything, and had arranged for his sister Claudia to take Sophie for the evening. He'd told Sophie he was having dinner with Victoria. Sophie had said, with the directness of someone who had been exercising patience for longer than was quite comfortable. Will she actually come this time? Yes, he'd said. She's coming. At 6:45, Victoria texted, I'm so sorry. Investor call ran long. I'm still at the office. Can we push to next week? He read the message. He sat with it. Then he typed back, sure, but he didn't push send. He sat there with the word in the text field and the reservation confirmation on the counter, and Sophie's question still in his ears, will she actually come? And he thought about the careful work he'd been doing, the patient recalibrating, the interpreting of her absence as circumstance rather than choice. And he thought about his daughter setting a table for two and looking at the empty chair. He deleted sure and typed instead, I need to talk to you. She called him 12 minutes later, which meant she'd looked at the message and understood it wasn't a standard reschedule. I'm here, she said. I know you're busy, he said. I know what this quarter is. I know the investor situation isn't simple. Ethan, I'm not done. Not unkindly, but clearly. Sophie asked me today if you were coming. I told her yes. That's the third time in 6 weeks I've told her something and then had to walk it back. A pause. She's 8. She doesn't have a lot of filters between what she feels and what that looks like on her face. I can't keep doing that to her. A long silence. I know, Victoria said. And then, more quietly, I know. I don't need you to live in my world, he said. I'm not asking for your whole life, but I need you to be present when you're here. Not managing an exit, not planning the next pullback before you've even arrived. I'm not doing that consciously. I know you're not. He pressed his thumb against the table. That's what I'm saying. You do it before you're aware of it. And I understand why. I genuinely do. But I have a daughter who is starting to learn what to expect from people. And right now, what she's learning is to not expect you. Another silence. He heard something shift on her end, not quite a sound, more like a quality change, like a signal dropping frequency. What are you saying? She asked. I'm saying I can't do the in-between anymore. The almost, the sometimes, the next week. I'm in or I'm not. Sophie's in or she's not. A pause. So are you. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Not wounded, something harder and more careful than wounded. I need time to... I know, he said. He said good night. He picked up Sophie from Claudia's apartment, told her the dinner had been postponed, ordered pizza, watched a movie about penguins that Sophie had been requesting for 2 weeks, and when she fell asleep on the couch, he sat in the kitchen in the dark and felt the particular ache of someone who has said the true thing and cannot yet know whether it was also the right one. The call came from her CFO at 7 on a Monday morning, not to Victoria, to her executive assistant, Rachel, who related up the chain with the careful neutrality of someone delivering information whose implications they've already understood. The message was about the Berlin expansion. The board wanted a decision by end of week. The investor calls had resolved, for now, in the company's favor. Everything was in motion. Everything was in motion. Victoria sat in her office on the 41st floor and looked at the words on the document in front of her and thought, I have never once, in this office, in this building, in this role, asked myself whether this was what I wanted. She had asked whether it was achievable, whether it was strategically sound, whether the numbers supported it, whether the timing was right. She had asked every question that a CEO asks about a decision, and had never once asked the question that a person asks. She got up and went to the window. The city below was going about its morning with complete indifference to her inner state, which was, she recognized, one of the things she had always liked about it. The city did not need her to be fine. It was already, independently, fine. She thought about Ethan in his kitchen making sauce. She thought about the way Sophie said her name, Victoria, 3 full syllables, treating it like it deserved the space. She thought about the skating rink and the bench and the sleeping child and the kiss and the particular quality of warmth that was not about temperature but about being known by someone who had no reason to pretend. She thought about every time she had felt herself in motion away from the apartment, away from the bakery, away from the table set for three, and the specific sensation of being pulled from one world into another, and the way she had never, in those moments, asked which world she was choosing. She had just moved in the direction of work, because work was the thing that had always been there, reliable and demanding, and hers. But it had never asked her if she was happy. It had never asked her anything except whether she was ready. She called Rachel. Cancel the 4 o'clock. The board prep? All of it. Reschedule the week. A pause. Miss Hale. And call Marcus in legal. I want to discuss the restructuring proposal from January. The one about the senior leadership transition. Another pause. Longer. I'll make the calls, Rachel said. She sat back at her desk. The Berlin document was still open. She closed it. She opened instead her phone and scrolled to a photograph she'd taken without planning to at Sophie's science fair of Sophie mid-explanation with her hands spread wide in the gesture she used for anything important, and Ethan beside her with the expression he had when Sophie was talking, attentive and quietly delighted and entirely present. Entirely present. That's what I want, she thought. That. The thing in that photograph. That's what I keep moving away from. She thought about all the mornings she'd eaten nothing, about how a cinnamon cake from a bakery on Amsterdam Avenue had made it past every professional wall she'd built, about the coloring book and the octopus and the teal crayon and the negotiation for it, conducted with complete seriousness between a CEO and an 8-year-old who had decided, for reasons of her own, to extend trust before trust had been earned. She can share mine for now. She had spent 2 weeks doing the calculus, the careful, managed kind weighing outcomes, assessing risks, modeling scenarios, the kind of thinking she was trained for and excellent at, and the answer kept coming back the same. You can run the company from somewhere other than the center of it. Other people are good enough. You made them good enough. Trust the work you did, but no one else can be present for this. She put the phone in her pocket and stood. She had a call to make, not to the board. It snowed again on a Saturday in late March, the last storm of the winter, the forecaster said. Or perhaps not the last, but the significant one, the one that came in overnight and changed the city by morning into something quieter and cleaner than it had been. Ethan was making pancakes. This was invariable. The Saturday pancake production, Sophie had negotiated it into existence when she was 5, and it had become the kind of ritual that holds a family's week in shape, the fixed point around which everything else orbited. Sophie was at the counter on her stool, cutting strawberries with the careful concentration of someone who has been trusted with a knife and intends to justify that trust, and the radio was doing its quiet Saturday morning thing, and the snow outside was pressing softly against the window, and it was, by any measure, a good morning. The buzzer sounded at 8:47. Ethan looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at Ethan. He crossed to the intercom. Yeah, it's Victoria. He pressed the door release without speaking. Sophie put down the knife. She didn't say anything, but he saw the careful stillness of someone who was waiting to understand what this was before they decided what to feel about it. He went to the door. She looked different from the last time, not dramatically, not in the way of movie transformations, but in the way that people look when they have made a decision and arrived on the other side of it. She was in her coat, the good one, but her hair was loose and she had snow on her shoulders, and she was carrying, inexplicably, a small bag from Morrow's bakery. I brought the cardamom cake, she said. He looked at her. Really looked at the quality of her presence in the doorway, at the straightforward way she met his eyes. You drove to Amsterdam Avenue in a snowstorm to get cardamom cake, he said. I walked. I wanted to think. A pause. She held his gaze. I talked to my board last week. We're restructuring the leadership team. I'm transitioning out of day-to-day operations by the fall. I'll stay in a strategic advisory role, a beat. I've already hired the replacement CEO. She's been ready for 2 years. I just didn't. I kept finding reasons to hold on. He was quiet. I'm not saying that to impress you, she said. Or to prove something. I'm saying it because it's what I decided and I think you should know. It changes what I'm able to offer. What are you able to offer? She looked at him steadily. I'm able to be here. Actual here, not the version where I'm planning my exit before I've walked through the door. She paused. I want to be here. With you, with Sophie, if she'll have me. I want Saturday mornings and terrible television and science fair poster boards and arguments about crayons. Her voice stayed even, but he heard the effort in the evenness, the discipline it took to say the true thing in plain language without softening it into something smaller. I want the thing in that photograph. The one at the science fair. I want to be in that photograph. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped back from the door. The pancakes are ready, he said. She came in. She put the bag from Morrow's on the counter and shook the snow from her coat and hung it on the hook by the door. Not the hook he'd pointed to. Not any directed hook, but a hook she chose herself with the ease of someone who has been here enough times to know where things go. Sophie was still on her stool, watching with the bright, unguarded attention she gave to anything important. Victoria came to the counter. She looked at the strawberries. Do you need help with those? She asked. Sophie studied her. The science fair scrutiny, the total attention. Yes, Sophie said, and moved over on the stool. Victoria sat beside her, picked up the spare knife. Ethan turned back to the griddle. Behind him, he could hear them, the small sounds of two people doing something ordinary and specific together. The quiet negotiation of shared work. The rhythm of it. He added batter to the pan and watched the bubbles form at the edges and thought about the long, uneven road from a hotel balcony in a snowstorm to here, to this kitchen, to this particular Saturday morning. He thought about the conversation on the balcony and what she'd said. I've never been kissed, and the rawness of it, the trust it had taken to say it to a stranger, and how that rawness was, looking back, the first true thing she'd offered him. He thought about all the ordinary things they'd done since. Coffee, pancakes, crayon negotiations, science fairs. Slow laps on an ice rink with snow on the ground and the city just far enough away. A kiss in the low gold light of late winter afternoon, warm and careful and real. None of it had been grand. All of it had mattered. Sophie said something he didn't catch, and Victoria answered. And Sophie laughed the laugh she had when something was genuinely funny, unmanaged, complete, the laugh she didn't edit for company, and he heard, underneath it, something he'd been waiting to hear. Victoria's laugh, too. Same quality, same surprise. The laugh that got past the careful parts. He flipped the pancakes. Are these the dinosaur-shaped ones? Victoria asked. Not until she's watched me make them 6 times, Sophie said, with the authority of someone quoting policy. Daddy says it takes practice. I've made a lot of pancakes, Ethan said. I know, Sophie said. That's what practice is. He served the pancakes. Sophie applied syrup with the focused generosity of a child given unsupervised access to something liquid and delicious. Victoria ate the cardamom cake alongside, tearing off pieces. Outside the window, the snow was slowing the storm almost over, or paused, or saving itself for something else. The light was beginning to shift from the flat gray of full snowfall toward the particular silver that comes when clouds start to break. After breakfast, Sophie announced, with the executive energy she brought to all declarations, that they were going outside. It's cold, Ethan said. It's snow, Sophie countered, as though this resolved the objection rather than restated it. They went outside. Sophie ran ahead in her red coat, a moving color against the white and gray of the sidewalk, throwing herself at the accumulated snow along the edges of parked cars with systematic joy. The city was muted, its usual register reduced to a soft, continuous hush. Their footsteps were quiet. Their breath was visible. Ethan and Victoria walked behind her. At some point, not planned, not significant, just the natural movement of 2 people on a narrow sidewalk, she took his hand. He felt it happen. The particular weight and pressure of a hand that has decided to be somewhere. He didn't look at her. She didn't look at him. They both watched Sophie, who had now located a snow-covered fire hydrant and was conducting some kind of geographic analysis of it. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Ahead of them, Sophie turned back to check that they were still there. The quick, habitual look of a child who knows she's loved and just wants to confirm the world is still in its right shape, and saw them, her father and the woman in the good coat, walking in the snow, holding hands. She looked at them for one full second. Then she turned back around, apparently satisfied with what she'd found, and ran ahead, and the three of them moved together through the last snow of winter, under the white sky, in the quiet that only comes when everything that needs to be said has been said, and what's left is simply the sound of being somewhere real.